Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Sibme Coach Replay Show. I'm your host, Cory Camp, and I'm so excited to bring back one of our favorite coaches here on the Coach Replay Show, Coach Kellie Pitman. Kellie is, if you don't know her yet, one of our elite team members on Sibme's virtual coaching team. And in addition to coaching for Sibme, she is also a 34-year educator who served with the Alaska Statewide Mentor Project and the Alaska State Performance Review Board. She's been a presenter at district, state, and national conferences. And most recently, she was the course author and instructor for one of our newest online courses, Formative Assessment, inside our brand new Teacher Learning Series at the Sibme Learning Center. So welcome to the show, Kellie.
Hi, Cory. Hi, everyone. Yes, I'm happy to be back on the Sibme Coach Replay Show. And now we're talking about one of my favorite topics today for supporting teachers.
Yeah, I know. When I gave you a ring last week, I said, hey, I have a spot open for the show. And I don't know about you, but we've been talking a lot about formative assessment with our coaches and our teachers. And so that's exactly what we're going to talk about today, formative assessment. And I know that you're going to cover some of just the basics. If we've got anybody who's really looking at how they're supporting teachers in formative assessment, sometimes you have to start with the definition and the process for formative assessment. So you're going to start us there. We'll talk about the 4 categories. And then I'm most excited about a few of the formative assessment strategies that you are going to explore with us and talk to us a little bit about how that can happen in person in a traditional more format and how we can do that with technology or through technology for our online learners.
Right. So, whether you're teaching face-to-face or online, formative assessment it's what I call the teacher's power tool, right?
Mm-hmm.
You get to plug it in and you'll make things happen in a big way. The student engagement will increase and you'll have the data you need to inform your teaching and the students' next steps in their learning. So that's why I like to talk about it so much.
Yeah. It's definitely a win-win when we think about it that way. And a lot of times when I'm working with teachers around formative assessment, or when I've done sessions on formative assessment, or even talking with coaches, like my teachers do exit tickets, right? They do that check for understanding. We all do that. So that's what formative assessment is, right?
It is, but it isn't, right? See,
Mm-hmm.
formative assessment happens when it changes what you're doing as the teacher or what the students are doing as learners. So the exit ticket is part of that process, or checking for understanding, part of that process. But the formative assessment happens when it gets that adaptation of what you're doing with students. So you've probably heard, everybody's probably heard the formative assessment is for the learning to come, or the formative assessment process will inform teachers in their instructions. I know that's been around, but I want to emphasize that it's an integrated action step.
Yeah, so it's really ongoing. And I know you have an analogy for this. It's one of my favorites.
I do. And anybody who's taken the course or plans to take the course, they'll get a repeat here. But if you take Google Maps or your car's navigational system and you plug in where you want to go, so you have your destination, you plug that in, and the route is set for you. So everything's good, you're on your way, and then it happens. There's unexpected construction or traffic, or if you're like me, you totally miss the exit because you're in the wrong lane. Right?
Or singing along to your radio,
Or maybe that.
or telling the kids to be quiet in the back so you can focus on driving. I mean,
But you know what happens next? The app is able to elicit information on where you are and then adapt your route so that you are rerouted to where you can get back on track, or at least where you can get to where you were going in the first place. So I just think that that's a great analogy for formative assessment in the classroom. When you put the student in the driver's seat there, and just imagine that, just like using your GPS, you elicit the information and adapt your lesson maybe on the spot or maybe the next day or the next unit to the students' learning needs to get them where they need to go.
Yeah, and I heard you mention the word process earlier. And so I'd love if you explain the process a little bit, because sometimes when we're coaching, the teacher's doing the formative assessment strategies, but maybe it's not informing instruction. Or other times they're missing a step maybe in that process. So give us that definition or the steps through that process.
Okay, sure. Just like using the GPS again, your destination needs to be set in the classroom. So the process starts with clarify, right? You need to know where you're going and the success criteria for getting there. And maybe the exit ticket that you're planning on comes at the end of the lesson, or the check for understanding that you're doing is sprinkled throughout the instruction. The clarify step for formative assessment starts at the beginning when you clarify the learning goal and the success criteria for getting there. So then your exit ticket or your check for understanding will elicit the evidence on what students think, know, or can do.
Yeah, and those are some of the examples that you're going to share with us today, right? Strategies to elicit that
Mhm.
information that's going to change what you were doing as the teacher or what the students are doing as learners. So
Right.
the process is to clarify learning goals and success criteria and then elicit evidence. What else?
Okay. Clarify, elicit, then interpret. So you interpret the evidence that you have elicited by comparing it to the learning goal. And teachers use the success criteria to determine the status of the learning and to identify the gap of where students are to where they need to go. So it's I can't help it. I just go back to the Google Maps, right? It
Mhm.
finds out where you are and compares to where you need to go, and then designs a reroute process for you. So the interpreting that um, is what helps you adapt, and that's the last step. So adapt the instruction or the students' learning tactics. So, this is where the process changes what you're doing as the teacher or what the students are doing as learners, moving students forward by matching the instruction to their learning needs. So, there
Yeah.
you got 4 steps: clarify, elicit, interpret, and adapt.
Yeah, which all point to that definition of formative assessment informing instruction, right? Changing what the teacher's doing or what the students are doing as learners. And I love that you make a point to say that within the definition. And it is a part of that formative assessment definition that are at some point, this is not just data for us as teachers facilitating the learning. Students should have ownership of their learning, and we need to make sure that we're teaching and reinforcing our students to use that formative assessment opportunity as a way to think about their thinking and adjust what they're doing as learners.
Right. And I think a lot of teachers are comfortable with, exploring different ways to present their instruction or do that. But I think we need to also focus on changing up what students are doing. If you're depending on um, question and answer discussion as a way for students to interact with content, uh, maybe they need to journal so that they can actually assign their own words to their understanding of the content, or maybe they need a chance to talk about it with peers so that they can verbally process. So changing those learning tactics is also something that needs to be equally considered.
Yeah. Yeah. So then are we ready for a few of your examples, Kelly?
Sure. So examples for the elicit step, and how to get that evidence of what students know and can do so that you can determine the learning gap that needs to be addressed. I should preface before I share a couple of examples that most of the strategies for formative assessment fall into 4 categories. There's questioning, feedback, peer assessment, and self-assessment. So the categories are not equal. Personally, I wish self-assessment got a lot more attention,
That's
but
again, that's informing students' own learning if we're
Mhm.
using those as self-assessments. Yep.
But I think there's a comfort level for teachers to use the questioning category the most.
Mhm. Yeah, teacher comfort level, checking for understanding is often just built right into our lesson plan, or it's something that we just do as a responsive teacher anyway. We're constantly gauging on task, and does it look like my students have that deer in the headlights, that I've kind of lost them possibly, or I'm starting to lose them because they're coming to me already knowing some of these things, and I need to pick up the pace a little bit or slow it down. Again, all great examples of formative assessment, just in the basic check for understanding. Do you have a couple of examples that can be used? We've got so many teachers right now who they're either teaching fully online this year, or they're in that in-person socially distanced, or they're doing both sometimes at the same time, that concurrent hybrid model. And so what are some ways teachers can beef up formative assessment with questioning?
So, how about carousel brainstorming?
Okay.
That can also be done with Padlet. And Padlet is a tool, online tool that a lot of teachers already know and they're using to some extent. So this is just another way to use a tool that you're already familiar with.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the idea of carousel brainstorming, and I should say, this could be used synchronously or asynchronously too. So you split the class up into groups of 4 or 5 students, and each group gets their own chart. If you're face to face, they would have their own chart or and colored marker. Now, if you're on Padlet, you might have 3 or 4 Padlet boards with their own separate links, right? So the chart happens on the Padlet boards.
Yeah, or the same Padlet board with 4 different columns, right?
There
One
you go.
for each group as well. Mhm.
There you go. Just make it work for you, right?
Right, right.
That's what we do. So the idea is to have each group write down what they know about a topic or possible answers to an open-ended question on the content that you've been instructing. And you might, if you were doing this face to face, you would place a time limit on each group. And when time is up, you would have the group pass their chart along to the other group, which will respond in their own color. So, and then on the Padlet, they would just go to the next column or to the next Padlet to begin responding, because students respond to the other group's answers before writing their own. So, and on Padlet, they have little emojis and a
Mhm.
place to reply or question. So you could even ask for add-ons, which would even elicit more evidence on what students know, right?
Yeah. Oh, I know.
And
Padlet's one of my favorite tools because you can allow others to comment on the post of previous people, or to like it by adding a heart, or even rate it 1 to 5, or with the number of stars. So there's lots of ways that you can think about that as they move from one column or one Padlet to another.
yeah. And since students are working in groups, you want to elicit individual information on what individual students know and can do. So you're being very aware of their participation and engagement, and looking for that evidence that you can collect on where your individual students are with the content that's being presented.
Yeah. Well, and I think this is a great strategy, and you could use it in person if you're in a one-to-one classroom, right? This is another kind of digital way to be able to do this carousel activity. If you're in an in-person classroom without extra devices, I could almost see that that chart might be passed to another individual. The group is not moving, but the chart is moving. Or again, Padlet's a great opportunity to not worry about having to, share that chart, and
Right.
therefore worry about
Right.
sharing germs, moving it from one group to another. They're able to do this touch free, which is really great. And you can have it displayed on your board if you're in person. Or I love the idea of thinking about this asynchronously
Me
and
too.
how they might be able to do that. I think that's a really fun way to do this.
Right? Just go through and add to each Padlet board and yeah, elicit the information that what students know and can do on any content that was presented throughout the day.
Yeah. Yeah. And I just want to take a minute to remind our viewers, if you're liking a few of these strategies or wanting to see that definition again, you can download Kellie's notes and takeaways from our Learning Center. So be sure to check that out. It's in the comments below. Click on that link and you'll be able to get your free downloadable of the takeaways from this week and any other week. So let's keep going. So I love carousel. It was one of those strategies I used a lot in my classroom as a teacher. It was one of my favorite ways to get my students up and moving and adding to ideas and elaborating a little bit deeper. So let's talk about the next strategy that you have for us.
Well, I also want to have you think about art of the sentence. It's a technique presented in Teach Like a Champion 2.0 by Doug Lamott. So the idea, well, the reason why I think art of a sentence might be one to highlight for everyone is that it doesn't matter if you're teaching face-to-face or online or hybrid. It doesn't change for any of those.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So the technique asks students to write a single, well-crafted sentence about the content presented in a lesson. So you could have them do that on paper in front of them or in front of you, or the online Google Docs that maybe you already have set up, or even in the chat box. And depending on the information that you want to elicit on what students know already, you could set parameters for the sentence or ask for a particular word of a particular vocabulary word to be integrated into the sentence. Mm-hmm. So then once students have submitted their sentences, then here's where the interpret part comes in. The teacher, then you start making your categories of sentences. Maybe you have 3 piles, like these students got it, feeling good. These students, maybe I need to dig a little deeper to see what they really understand or what questions they have. And then here's the category. I actually had a teacher I was coaching. She said, these students didn't even look at the PowerPoint. Right. I can tell by the sentence. So anyway, interpret that evidence, and then that will adjust your instruction for the students' learning needs, or like we talked about earlier, the students' learning tactics.
Yeah, and this is also one of my favorite, as a former ELA teacher, one of my favorite strategies. And it's also a lower stake for our kiddos who struggle with typing or writing skills, spelling, and any of those pieces. It's just a single sentence, so it feels much more low stakes, but it really is a more rigorous task because they're having to synthesize everything down to that one sentence.
Right.
I love using discussion stems with this as well, as we're getting started with this, just to give my students, and then I start to phase those out. Here's a few you might use. You could also craft your own. So stems is another way I like to scaffold that particular strategy as well.
Right. And what about just only requiring a sticky note? If you're face-to-face, sticky notes are so... I don't know. They just help those students not feel overwhelmed. It's like, oh, yes. I only have to do this much. I can do this much.
Yeah, I feel like you and I have talked about sticky notes before because they are one of my favorite tools. And there's digital platforms. If you're using Jamboard, you can add a sticky note to your digital Jamboard, your collaborative board. You can use sticky notes in a number of different ways, but yeah, I loved the sticky note just for that reason. I don't have to fill out a whole page. It's not a big amount that I have to write. I'm just one sentence, just a small bit for my reluctant writers. But then for my wordy writers, it limited them to really getting this down just to your one sentence. And Don't write teeny, 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 tiny. So definitely one of my favorite strategies. And again, there's lots of different ways that you can do digital sticky notes when you're kind of adding that to the art of the sentence as well. Allison Burnett is watching, and she said they really are think pads. I love that, Allison. That's a really great way to refer to these. I have think pads left all over my office. That's the one problem with me using sticky notes. I think we have time for maybe one more. I know you and I talked about maybe sliding an extra one in from maybe the self-assessment category, since it is one of our favorites. Do we have time for that?
Sure. Thank you. Yeah, I do like strategies from the self-assessment category of formative assessment strategies because it promotes the skills of reflective practice for students, and that self-monitoring that is really important right now if you're trying to teach online. It develops that self-directed learning for students and increases their motivation and helps them develop a range of personal and transferable skills for their educational careers, right?
Mm-hmm.
So for self-assessment, the easy, obvious one is a student-written rubric, because you already have the success criteria that we talked about that in that clarify step. So using the success criteria and having students write their own rubric and then using that rubric at different points throughout the lesson or throughout the instruction gives an opportunity for self-assessment and also elicits information for you on how to direct your instruction.
I love this idea. One, because you're talking a little bit about these student-created rubrics off of that success criteria. But two, especially for the online instruction, or even if I'm doing hybrid and I'm maybe really getting into station rotation and a lot of independent learning, our students have so much more ownership in their classrooms now because of what the spring sprung us into with online learning. And as we continue to prepare for if we're having to close down again next week or we're coming back in person, we're seeing a lot of things shifted to our students. And this is a really great way to help them kind of self-check as they move through the process. And so I love this idea. This could be their, own cue to go back and watch the tutorial video or watch the mini lesson if they aren't hitting a specific thing, or, phone a friend or phone the teacher, right? So reach out in the message. I think it's important when they have that rubric and they're doing a lot of more independent self-directed to also talk about what if you realize you're missing one of those elements, what can you do? How do you access help, or how do you go back and kind of readjust?
So true. Just have that system already in place.
Yeah. And practicing, right? So you'll want to practice that in person or synchronously in the online environment. And then it really can be a tool that elevates your classroom and your learners in those asynchronous times, for sure. Well, I love these strategies that you picked for us. I know it's 20 some minutes is not enough time for us to talk about all things formative assessment, but you really did pick some great ones to chat about. And don't forget, y'all, you can check out these and more. I think, how many do you have in the formative assessment course? You do a whole blitz of formative assessment strategies across all 4 categories. Do you remember how many are in that course?
Yeah, there are 27 specific ones. Of course, you could do, variations of any of them, but 27 specific strategies.
Well, and
the tool blitz.
Yeah, the tool blitz, right? And in that, it's 27 strategies that you say, here's what it looks like, and in a more online or in person, and then here's how you could take this online. That's my favorite part about some of those, is you had some really great tools and strategies for going virtual or digital with those 27 different tools. So check it out. It is a free course for anybody looking to help their teachers with formative assessment. You could take it as a coach or a leader and bring some of those tools to your teachers directly, or you can have them go through it. It's self-paced, completely free. So many great resources. So be sure to check that out. You'll see a link as well in the Coach Replay notes and takeaways from today. All right, Kellie. Well, I know we'll have you come back again. Let us know if you're watching live or on demand, if you want more strategies and do kind of this and that in person and online. How would that look, those different variations? Let us know if you like that format. Kellie, thank you so much for joining again today. It's always a pleasure having you on the show.
Well, I'm always happy to visit with you, Cory. So, and let me take this opportunity to applaud teachers everywhere.
Mhm.
You are making it happen face to face, online, hybrid, whatever, however, you are providing learning opportunities to your students and making a difference in their lives now and toward the future for all of us. So, I thank you for that.
Yes, yes. Shout out to all of our teachers. I know it's been a crazy week if you're doing Red Ribbon Week or Spirit Week as we get ready for Halloween tomorrow. I hope you've had some fun ways to get to connect with your students and dive into your content and take that easy pace. So the Thanksgiving break is just around the corner, teachers. So all right. Well, be sure to like, follow, subscribe to our show if you want to get reminders every time we go live. We're here every single Friday right here, or you can always watch us on demand. So thanks for joining us. Karen Ramos is on. She says, great job, Kellie. So join us. Make sure that you have subscribed, liked, followed, and have a great day. Catch us next week on the Sibme Coach Replay Show.